The dog sat perfectly still beside the metal railing, but inside him, everything was shaking. The airport was loud in the way storms are loud, rolling suitcases clattering like distant thunder, announcements echoing through high ceilings, the sharp smell of disinfectant and jet fuel hanging in the air. He had been trained to ignore all of it. Years of commands lived in his muscles. Sit, stay, watch, protect. But today something was wrong. His handler's scent was fading from his collar, replaced by confusion, by absence. The leash lay slack on the floor, forgotten, like a sentence left unfinished. That was when the small voice reached him, soft enough to slip through the noise. "Are you lost too?" He turned his head slowly. A little girl stood a few steps away, her shoes mismatched, her backpack dragging on the floor behind her. Her eyes were too steady for someone so young, the kind of steady that comes from waiting too long for someone who hasn't come back. She crouched to his level without fear, her breath trembling, her hand hovering in the air between them. In that moment, the trained police dog, the one who found bombs, chased shadows, followed orders without question, felt something crack open inside his chest. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know whether to stay or to move toward her. The airport was enormous, a cathedral of glass and steel stretching into a horizon of hurried lives. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing a sterile glare onto the polished floors, reflecting the endless movement of travelers as they dragged suitcases behind them, their faces pressed against the glow of phones or lost in their own private thought. Every echo of rolling wheels, every shouted announcement, every clipped footstep ricocheted against the high ceilings and made the world feel impossibly vast. Somewhere amid this chaos, a police dog sat perfectly still, his fur shining under the artificial light, ears twitching at every sound. But inside him, everything was shaking. Years of training had honed him to notice patterns, to anticipate danger, to follow commands without hesitation. Yet now, tethered to nothing, free of leash and order, he felt the unfamiliar churn of uncertainty, the hollow weight of absence pressing against his ribs. His handler's presence, usually a constant hum at his back, was gone, replaced by a strange silence that seemed almost alive, creeping along his spine, pricking at the edges of instinct. He tried to focus, to remember the routines he had mastered, but every step of the passing travelers reminded him that he was alone. And then came a voice, soft, tentative, carrying the tremor of a heart too young to carry such weight. "Are you lost too?" The words cut through the noise, singular, intimate, unlike any command or alarm he had ever known. He turned his head slowly, nostrils flaring, ears leaning forward, trying to locate the source amid the chaos. A little girl stood a few paces away, her shoes mismatched, one scuffed and the other almost new, her backpack dragging lazily on the floor behind her, straps stretched and worn. Her hair fell in soft, untamed strands across her forehead, framing eyes far too steady for her age. There was fear there, yes, but there was also a resilience, a patience honed by waiting too long for someone who had not yet come back. She crouched to his level, knees brushing the floor, her hand hovering in the uncertain space between them. She didn't rush, she didn't cry, she simply waited. And the dog, trained to act, to decide, to obey without question, found himself frozen in a strange limbo. The smell of the airport was thick around them, jet fuel clinging to the vents, the faint tang of disinfectant, the aroma of hastily reheated meals from the nearby food court. It wrapped itself around the small bubble that contained the girl and the dog, isolating them in a moment that felt both intimate and impossibly warm. He noticed the tremble in her hand, the shallow rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers flexed and released, unsure whether to touch or retreat. She was offering him a bridge across the divide, an instinct warred with caution. Years of training told him to approach, to assess, to protect, but something deeper, quieter, more human, whispered to him as well. The little girl inched forward, hand brushing against the tips of his fur. He flinched, his body a tense coil, muscles ready to spring, yet unable to move away. She didn't pull back, she let the contact linger, and in that pause, a fragile understanding formed. Neither of them belonged here fully, not in this place, in this moment, surrounded by movement that didn't notice them. And yet they belonged to each other, in a way that required no words, only attention, only recognition. She tilted her head, waiting for a response, eyes wide but calm. And for the first time, the dog felt the tug of something that wasn't due. Something that was curiosity, that was compassion, that was connection. The sounds around them shifted slightly as a distant trolley clattered over a seam in the floor, announcing its presence with a shrill metallic scream. People moved around them in a blur, a sea of hurried feet and turned backs, and yet here, in this small precarious pocket, time seemed to hesitate. He sniffed cautiously, the air between them, and she smiled a little, a half-smile, the kind that holds both hope and fear in equal measure. It was then that he noticed the subtle tremor in her shoulders, the way her knees brushed the ground as though they carried the weight of waiting, the ache of an absent guardian. He understood, in a way that bypassed thought entirely, that she was alone too. And for a moment, for the briefest heartbeat stretched to infinity, the vast airport seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them suspended in a silence that carried more weight than the noise ever could. Her voice came again, softer this time, almost swallowed by the ambient clamor. "Yeah, I don't know where Mommy is. And I think Daddy's gone too." The dog's ears twitched. His tail, stiff at first, began a hesitant wag, almost imperceptible, a signal of recognition, of empathy. He could feel her anxiety radiating outward, as though it were a tangible force pressing against his ribs. He wanted to move, to do something, anything, but the invisible cords of training and fear held him in place. She noticed it, her small hand hovering again, and with a tentative courage born of necessity, she reached out fully, letting her fingers graze the coarse fur along his back. The touch was electric. Years of instinct met a moment of vulnerability, and the dog exhaled slowly, letting his muscles relax for the first time since the separation. He leaned slightly into her hand, careful, cautious, a small but deliberate surrender. She laughed softly, a sound that trembled but did not break, and it was almost like sunlight spilling into a darkened room. And in that laughter, the tension inside him softened, a reminder that even in a world of orders, routines and hazards, there was space for tenderness. Above them, the fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing with static, and somewhere, a distant airplane roared, its engines shaking the ground beneath their feet. Yet neither the girl nor the dog moved from their small circle. Around them, life surged in chaotic pulses, travelers oblivious to the quiet miracle forming at the edge of the terminal. He watched her, studied her, read her patience, her courage, her fear, and in that reading, something new awoke within him. He was no longer just a police dog trained to obey. He was a companion, a protector in the truest, most unspoken sense of the word. The girl's eyes met his fully then, and she whispered, almost to herself, maybe we can find each other." And in that whisper, a contract formed that needed no signatures, no words beyond recognition and trust. The dog's head tilted, ears forward, tail flicking with purpose. He had no map, no plan, no certainty of what came next. But he knew one thing: whatever else happened in this sprawling, indifferent airport, he would not leave her side. Not now, not ever. And for the first time, in the middle of endless noise, flashing lights and cold metal, the dog felt a strange stirring warmth in his chest, a pulse of life that wasn't training, wasn't instinct. It was connection. The little girl had offered him a hand, a fragile bridge across loneliness, and he had accepted. The world was still vast. The noise was still overwhelming, but for now, they had each other, and that small, trembling certainty was enough to begin. The little girl's hand lingered on the dog's fur, brushing along the coarse hairs with a nervous rhythm, as if measuring the warmth she felt against her palm. He remained still at first, every muscle taut, every instinct poised on the edge of decision. Around them, the airport moved like a river of steel and sound, travelers flowing in impossible waves, wheels screeching over tiles, trolleys rattling like distant thunder, announcements echoing overhead with clipped urgency. The little girl's breath came in shallow, uneven pulls, her tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm half commanded by hope, half strangled by fear. She looked at him, eyes wide, pupils dark, and whispered again, it's okay, I won't hurt you." Her voice was barely audible above the ambient roar, but the dog heard it as clearly as if the words had been etched into his mind. She meant it, and for reasons he could not name, he believed her. A step, a cautious, almost imperceptible shift forward, his paws pressing against the cold floor, testing the world, testing her. She mirrored him, leaning slightly closer, allowing her hand to follow his movement. Their connection was silent, fragile, a delicate negotiation of trust. She hummed a soft tune, something she had learned from waiting too long in empty rooms, a melody that rose and fell with tremulous hope. The dog listened, every nerve alive, his nose twitching as he took in her scent. The faint trace of sugar from the snack she had eaten before she was left behind, the soap in her hair, the mixture of fear and courage in her sweat. Her heartbeat hammered in a rhythm he could almost count, and it called to the memory of his own pulse when facing danger, when duty had demanded focus and obedience. But this was different. There were no commands here, only choice, only the raw, trembling pulse of companionship forming between them. Round them, the chaos of the terminal pressed closer. A family brushed past, dragging a suitcase that toppled over with a metallic clang, the sound ricocheting across walls. The little girl flinched, and the dog's ears shot up, muscles coiling in protective reflex. He nudged her gently with his nose, careful not to push, just enough to anchor her to the present, to signal that she was safe. She smiled faintly, a mix of relief and wonder, and took another hesitant step forward. The distance between them closed imperceptibly, measured not in inches but in trust, each movement a sentence in an unspoken dialogue. Security officers glanced their way, noting the girl wandering and the dog off-leash. One officer called out, his voice sharp, authoritative. The little girl froze, eyes darting around, uncertainty etched into her small frame. The dog stiffened beside her, tail lowering slightly, ears flat against his skull, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Not a growl, not a threat, just a sound of warning, of caution, of readiness. It was the barrier between her and the world that might pull her away, the living shield she did not yet fully understand. She reached for him instinctively, clinging to the anchor he had become. And in that touch his body relaxed again, muscles loosening just enough to show that he accepted her as part of this moment, as part of himself. A sudden surge of travelers moved past, a blur of legs and rolling bags. The little girl stumbled slightly, catching herself on the dog's side. He shifted, aligning himself to guide her, a subtle nudge of his flank, a tap of his nose near her hand. She laughed softly, the sound trembling but defiant, a fragile spark that the dog recognized as joy. For a heartbeat, the world beyond their little circle ceased to exist. The flickering fluorescent lights, the roar of engines, the metallic scent of the airport, they all receded into a background hum. There was only the tactile certainty of her fingers brushing against his fur, the warmth radiating from her small body, the silent communication of two souls reaching toward each other. The little girl spoke again, more firmly this time, a "come on." Her words were simple but heavy with intent. She reached out, this time taking a firmer hold on the fur at the back of his neck, guiding him forward. He paused, instincts whispering hesitation. Yet he could feel the trust radiating from her, a quiet insistence that they would navigate this together. Step by step they began to move, weaving through the throng of travelers. The dog adjusted to her pace, careful not to pull ahead, careful not to overwhelm. Each movement was deliberate, a ballet of understanding that required no language, only attention, only empathy. Somewhere near the gate, a mother frantically searched for her own child, the sound of her voice mingling with the drone of announcements. The little girl's grip on the dog tightened. She was aware, even in her own vulnerability, that they were outsiders in this enormous machine of arrivals and departures, and yet she did not falter. She whispered words of encouragement to herself and to him, murmurs meant to steady their hearts. "We can do this. We'll be okay." The dog, attuned to the cadence of her voice, let his body relax slightly more, letting her confidence flow through him, letting the rhythm of their steps become a shared heartbeat. A sudden obstacle, a luggage cart careened too close, threatening to topple. The dog reacted instinctively, sidestepping to shield her, body curling slightly around her, eyes scanning for further threats. The girl gasped, but the panic in her was short-lived. She felt the solid reassurance of his presence, a living shield she could trust, and the fear receded into adrenaline and wonder. She pressed closer, holding on to him, not just for protection, but for the affirmation that they could face the chaos together. Around them, the world continued its relentless pace. But inside their small bubble, trust had been forged in the quiet language of movement, touch, and shared vulnerability. By the time they reached a quieter corner of the terminal, a subtle space between gates where the echoes softened, the girl stopped and knelt beside him. She stroked his head, fingers tangling in fur, voice low and certain. "I see you're not lost. We're not lost. We're not lost." He tilted his head, eyes meeting hers, sensing the truth in her words, the fragile triumph of two lonely hearts finding connection in a place that had once felt vast and unwelcoming. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the metallic hum of the building seemed to soften, as if recognizing the bond that had formed. They were no longer two solitary beings navigating chaos. They were a unit, a pair stitched together by tentative trust and shared solitude. She leaned back against his side, resting her head briefly, and he allowed her to do it, standing steady beneath her small weight, muscles relaxed but alert. He had no idea what came next, where their journey would lead, whether someone would intervene, whether their bubble would be pierced by the external world. But for this moment, he felt something he had never known before. Choice not commanded, loyalty not enforced, a connection born of recognition rather than orders. The little girl's hand rested on him, her fingers tracing familiar paths across his fur, and he exhaled a slow, deliberate breath, allowing the warmth of her trust to anchor him, letting the tremor of uncertainty dissolve into a tentative courage. And in the soft exchange of breaths, small movements and quiet trust, they took the first step, not toward a destination, but toward each other. The airport had become a tempest. Announcements cracked overhead, rolling in waves of urgent voices that blurred into white noise, punctuated by the roar of engines and the clatter of suitcase wheels on tile. Travelers surged past, a tide of hurried faces and half-heard conversations, oblivious to the quiet drama unfolding at the edge of the terminal. The little girl clutched the dog's fur as they moved, her tiny hands tight with determination, her eyes flicking anxiously toward every approaching figure. Each step was measured, cautious, as if they were crossing a field of invisible hazards. The dog's body was taut beneath her touch, ears pricked, tail low but steady, scanning for threats with the trained precision of a seasoned police 9. He had never faced a storm like this. Never had he moved through chaos, not to chase or protect a human in danger, but to guide one who was already fragile and afraid. Yet instinct and empathy intertwined now, forming a rhythm that carried them forward. A sudden surge of travelers pushed them toward the gates. The girl stumbled slightly, a gasp escaping her lips, and the dog responded instantly, positioning himself between her and the tide of feet. His head swiveled, eyes alert, every muscle coiled in readiness. She leaned into his side, pressing her small frame against him, seeking reassurance she had never known before. Around them, the fluorescent lights flickered and hummed, throwing long, restless shadows across the polished floor. The metallic tang of jet fuel mixed with the acrid scent of cafeteria coffee and heated rubber from rolling luggage, creating a sensory storm that mirrored the turbulence in their hearts. The dog's tail flicked, a subtle signal of alertness, but he did not flinch from her touch. Instead, he anchored her, letting her fear find a tether in his calm, measured presence. The little girl's breathing hitched. "I don't want to be alone," she whispered, voice trembling yet resolute. The dog responded with a soft exhale, a low rumble vibrating from deep within, a sound neither threat nor growl, but a promise of protection. He nudged her gently forward with his nose, guiding her past a slippery patch of tile, past travelers whose awareness didn't extend beyond their own hurry. Every movement was a dialogue of trust. Her hand pressed along his side, following the contours of his muscles, reading his intent, learning the language of instinct that he had honed over years of duty. Together they navigated the surging waves, a pair whose communication required no words beyond touch, gaze, and the silent cadence of mutual reliance. Somewhere ahead, the little girl glimpsed a terminal map on a glowing display. Her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and panic. "It may be this way," she said, pointing, uncertain if she even knew where they were going. The dog hesitated, sniffing the air, muscles tensing for a split second before he allowed her lead. It was a choice, a concession of agency, a silent agreement that he would follow her courage as much as she followed his protection. Each step was deliberate, careful, a dance of instinct and trust. Around them, the chaos swelled, a group of travelers arguing over luggage, a janitor's cart tipping with a clatter of cans and mops, but they moved through it unbroken, as if a narrow path had opened just for them amid the storm. The little girl's pace faltered. She stumbled on a seam in the tile, arms flailing. The dog reacted instantly, catching her with a nudge of his body, the solid warmth of his side pressing her upright. She steadied herself, a breath shuddering out, and whispered a soft thanks, more to herself than to him. He lowered his head, ears alert, eyes scanning the crowd, as if affirming that the danger had passed. Around them, the terminal hummed with life, indifferent and relentless, yet inside their small shared bubble, time seemed to stretch and bend. Every touch, every glance, every exhaled breath built layers of trust, each moment anchoring them deeper to each other. Then came a sudden, sharp sound. A suitcase toppled near them, the crash reverberating across the floor. The girl froze, heart hammering. The dog reacted in a heartbeat, positioning himself so that her body was shielded, head low, ears flat, muscles coiled for movement. Travelers jumped aside, oblivious to the precise ballet unfolding at their feet. She pressed against him, small hands clutching his fur, inhaling his scent like a lifeline. The low rumble from his chest vibrated through her palms, a silent assurance that he would not let the chaos touch her. It was instinct at its rawest, refined through training, but now tempered by a tenderness that only vulnerability can summon. They continued, weaving through corridors and between gates, shadows and light flickering across their path as planes roared overhead. The little girl glanced up at him, eyes wide with wonder and fear. "You're not just a dog," she said, voice trembling. You're like a friend." The dog's ears flicked. He did not understand the words fully, yet the tone carried meaning. He sensed the gratitude, the relief, the fragile spark of hope, and he leaned slightly into her touch, a living acknowledgement that yes, he would be her friend, her guide, her guardian. She smiled faintly, a small victory against the tide of anxiety pressing from all directions. A sudden announcement blared, a gate change, a flight delayed, a call for missing passengers. The noise rattled the terminal, causing travelers to jostle and the girl to press her face into his side. The dog's tail flicked, alert but steady. He moved instinctively, guiding her along the edge of the corridor, avoiding collisions, offering her both physical and emotional support. Step by step, they carved a path through the storm, navigating both the chaos of the environment and the storm within the little girl's heart. Each movement was a negotiation, a dance of empathy and instinct, the rhythm of two beings learning to trust each other beyond words. Eventually, they reached a quieter stretch near the observation windows, where sunlight spilled across polished tile, casting long, warm reflections that softened the harsh lines of the terminal. The little girl knelt beside him, hands brushing his fur, and whispered, We did it, didn't we?" The dog exhaled slowly, body easing, ears relaxing, tail brushing the floor in a subtle wave of contentment. He could feel her heartbeat, erratic and fragile but steadying, syncing in rhythm with his own measured pulse. Around them, the storm of the airport raged on, indifferent, but inside this small corner, the tempest had calmed, if only for a moment. They sat together in silence, connected by shared experience, by the subtle language of movement, touch, and breath. The girl leaned against him, drawing courage from his stillness, drawing reassurance from his presence. And he, in turn, felt a stirring within him he had never known. A loyalty unbound by duty, a bond forged in chaos, a trust that had transcended fear. Together, they had navigated the storm, each step a testament to courage, each pause a promise that they would face the next challenge together. The terminal shifted around them, a river of motion that threatened to sweep them apart at every step. Travelers surged past, suitcases clattering, announcements slicing through the air with mechanical urgency, the roar of jets vibrating through the floors. The little girl's fingers clung to the dog's fur, as if the bond between them were the only thing anchoring her to reality. Her heart pounded, every beat echoing the fear she had carried through hours of waiting, of wandering, of being overlooked. The dog sensed it all, the quiver in her chest, the tremor in her hands, the tiny, desperate flicker of hope that her parents would appear before the world swallowed her entirely. He pressed closer, nudging her gently with his head, guiding her with the precision of instinct honed over years of duty. He was more than trained muscle now. He was a compass, a guardian, the living proof that connection could form in chaos. Ahead, a cluster of security officers turned, noticing the girl and the dog. Their radios crackled, voices sharp and commanding. Panic tightened in her small frame. The dog stiffened, low growl vibrating in his chest. Not a threat, not aggression, but a signal that danger existed, that the world outside their fragile bubble was capable of pulling her away. She pressed closer, forehead brushing his side, hands clutching the fur as if to remind herself that she was not alone. He felt her fear and mirrored it in his own way. Muscles tense, senses acutely alert, ears flicking at every approaching step. They were a pair caught between instinct and circumstance, navigating a world that was vast, indifferent, and unforgiving. Then, in the swell of movement, she spotted a familiar figure, her father rushing through the throng, voice cracking with relief and urgency. She gasped, a tremor of hope igniting in her chest. "A daddy!" she called, her voice trembling yet bright. The dog's ears perked, his body coiling with tension. He had been trained to obey commands, to follow instructions, to reunite with handlers. Yet now, instinct and loyalty collided, pulling him in two directions. She had guided him, trusted him, made him part of her fragile courage. Could he let her go now? The surge of chaos around them felt heavier, faster, as if the entire terminal pressed down upon this critical choice. Her father's eyes locked on her, wide and panicked. Security officers moved closer, concern etched into every movement. The little girl's small hand pressed against the dog's side, a silent plea for assurance. He leaned into her touch, muscles tense, head low, aware of the invisible divide forming between duty and devotion. In that moment, the dog's mind processed everything he had learned, years of commands, instinctual protection, loyalty to his handler, and filtered it through something newer, something fragile but undeniable: connection. She was more than a stranger. She was the reason he had moved, the reason he had trusted, the reason he had chosen to protect beyond obligation. The father closed the distance, voice frantic. "A sweetheart, are you okay? Where have you been?" She hesitated, looking down at the dog, eyes wide, heart splitting in half between relief and attachment. The dog felt the shift in the air, the approach of her family, the tangible pull of responsibility drawing her back. But he did not move. He stayed grounded, ears alert, tail lowered but steady, offering silent reassurance that she could return without fear. She reached out, hands on the dog's head, pressing gently. I'll be okay," she whispered, voice trembling. The dog exhaled, a low vibrating breath, muscles relaxing fractionally, acknowledging her courage, acknowledging the bond they had formed, acknowledging that this moment was a turning point. Her father scooped her up in a trembling embrace, relief washing over his face, tears glinting in the fluorescent glare. Security officers waved away the crowd, radioing their handler, unaware of the delicate negotiation that had just taken place between child and dog. The little girl clung to her father for a heartbeat, then turned her gaze to the dog, eyes soft, wide, filled with gratitude and something more elusive, a recognition of loyalty, of bravery, of unspoken love. The dog tilted his head, ears flicking, body still tense but relaxed enough to allow the smallest wag, a subtle signal of acceptance, of understanding. He had chosen, in his own way, to honor the connection they had forged. The father's hands rested lightly on the dog's back, sensing the tension beneath the fur, the coiled readiness of muscles that had guided and protected his daughter through chaos. The dog exhaled again, slower now, easing the weight of vigilance. He had crossed the divide between duty and emotion, and now the world could reclaim its claim on the little girl, but the bond remained, etched in fur, breath, and heartbeat. Around them, the airport surged on, oblivious, indifferent, yet within this small convergence of lives, the storm had passed. The noise, the rush, the flickering lights. They were all still there, but softened by the intimacy of what had transpired. She reached a tentative hand out again, brushing along his fur, a gentle touch that conveyed the entire language of gratitude, of trust, of farewell. "A thank you," she whispered, voice cracking. "A thank you for keeping me safe." The dog pressed his head slightly into her palm, eyes soft, ears leaning forward. No words were needed. The exchange carried volumes. He had protected and trusted, and she had responded in kind. It was a quiet, unspoken culmination of everything they had endured together. The terminal, with all its clamor, seemed to recognize the stillness between them, allowing a pause in the storm, as if granting them space to acknowledge the gravity of their connection. The handler arrived moments later, breathless, uniform wrinkled, eyes scanning until they landed on the dog. There was a moment of recognition, a professional relief mingled with personal concern, and then the subtle tension between duty and emotion relaxed. The dog acknowledged his handler with a brief nod of the head, but his gaze lingered on the little girl, acknowledging the journey they had shared, the trust built in moments of uncertainty and fear. His loyalty had not wavered, yet it expanded, stretched beyond training into something profoundly human. The little girl hugged her father tightly, then leaned forward one last time, pressing her cheek to the dog's muzzle. The touch was gentle, lingering, a promise that their paths, however briefly intertwined, had left an indelible mark on both hearts, The dog exhaled, tail brushing the floor in a subtle wave, eyes soft and steady. He had crossed the divide, not just the physical space between chaos and safety, but the emotional expanse between instinct and connection, between duty and devotion. He had chosen to protect, to trust, and to love in the purest, quietest way he knew. As the father carried her toward the exit, the dog followed for a few tentative steps, then paused. The little girl looked back, hand lifted in a small wave, eyes shining with tears and gratitude. He sat, ears forward, tail flicking gently, a silent acknowledgement that the bond remained, unbroken by distance or circumstance. The terminal, vast and indifferent, swallowed them into its motion, yet in that fleeting exchange, the storm had left a calm, a recognition of the extraordinary hidden in ordinary moments, a testament to courage, trust, and connection forged amid chaos. The sunlight spilled across the terminal windows, scattering golden ribbons across the polished floor, softening the harsh lines of steel and glass that had once felt cold and unwelcome. The little girl's father held her close, her head resting against his shoulder, eyes still glistening with unshed tears. She clutched the straps of her small backpack, fingers brushing against the dog's fur one last time. He had guided her through fear, through uncertainty, through the chaos of a world that had felt too big, too loud, too overwhelming. And now, though the next steps would carry her away, he had given her something far more enduring, the certainty that even in the vastest storms, connection could form, trust could be earned, and love could exist in quiet, unexpected ways. The father finally lifted the little girl, turning toward the exit with tentative steps, casting one last glance over his shoulder. The dog remained, a constant presence, steadfast, a bridge between what was and what would be. She waved, small hand trembling, eyes bright with tears and gratitude. The dog's tail flicked once, then twice, a subtle wave that mirrored the unspoken bond. And in that simple gesture, they both understood. Distance would not erase what had been forged. As they moved toward the gates, toward the world outside, the sunlight caught her hair, scattering gold across the terminal floor, and for a brief, suspended moment, the dog watched her go. The echo of her small voice, the press of her hand against his fur, the rhythm of her heartbeat against the chaos, they all remained. And in that moment, the dog understood a truth that no training, no command, no instinct had ever fully prepared him for. Sometimes the deepest rescue is not from danger, but from loneliness itself. He sat, chest rising and falling, ears flicking at the distant sounds of life moving on, and for the first time, he allowed a small, contented sigh. He had crossed fear, chaos, and uncertainty. He had given protection, offered trust, and in return had received a gift that transcended orders, a gift that was neither spoken nor demanded. It was simple, yet infinitely complex, connection. And in that recognition, in the quiet warmth settling into his chest, he found something like home. Not a place, not a handler, not a command, but the lingering presence of a heart he had touched, a life he had changed, and the certainty that even in the vastest spaces, even in the storm of the world, home could be found in the heart. The little girl and her father disappeared into the sunlight streaming through the airport doors, but the memory remained, etched into every nerve, every heartbeat, every breath of the dog's being. He remained seated, tail flicking, ears forward, eyes soft but alert. And for the first time, he did not wait for a command. He waited for nothing at all, simply allowing the memory, the bond, and the quiet warmth of connection to fill the space where chaos had once reigned. The terminal stretched wide and endless before him, indifferent, yet the storm had passed, and in its place there was something lasting, fragile, extraordinary, and eternal.